Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jo Harrison and I'm an Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Manager at Lancashire and South Cumbria NHS. I lead on LGBTQ+ and disabilities. So I'm really pleased to welcome everyone to the session today. It's one of our many sessions that we've got planned for LGBT History Month, and it's been organised by NHS Trusts and key partners across Lancashire and South Cumbria as part of our efforts to build stronger ties between communities and institutions. We hope that this approach will build alliances, experiences and outcomes of LGBTQ people who we seek to serve. So before I hand you over to Pradeep, just a few points. If you could all please keep your mics off unless you're asking a question, and if you can keep your camera up as well, please, unless you're asking a question as well, just because we are going to be filming the session. Obviously, our panel members will be on camera. And if you need subtitles, it's under More Actions, and you can find it that way. You've got your options for live captions under there, and we will be putting the event on. It will be available on one of our YouTube channels. Okay, so I'll hand you over to Pradeep. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jo. I'm really delighted to be here this morning. No, we're in the afternoon, chairing this event. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Pradeep Passy. I'm the Director of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Central Lancashire. And as I said, I'm really being able to collaborate with the Trust and with UK Black Pride in order to bring you this event this afternoon. So what we've got for you this afternoon is, I guess, what we might call a panel discussion. So we have colleagues from the University of Central Lancashire who have research interests in this area, and also Pav as Director of the Black Pride, UK Black Pride, on the panel as well, who will be sharing some of his thoughts and experiences in this area too. And we're just going to ask the panel members to say a few words about their research area. I'm going to sort of facilitate by asking some questions of the panel members, and then hopefully we can open that up to the group, who will hopefully share your own questions or comments on things that you've heard. We've got a chat facility on Teams, and I would encourage you to use that throughout the session, and I'll pick up on those questions or comments that you've made as we go through. So as I mentioned, we've got colleagues from the University of Central Lancashire. So we have on the panel Professor Helen Spandler, who is a Professor of Mental Health Studies and has a research interest in areas related to LGBTQ+ communities, and she'll talk about those research areas in a moment. We also have Dr. Megan Todd, who is a senior lecturer here at UCLan, and her research area is around the intersectionality between gender, sexuality and violence. And finally, we have Pav Akhtar, who is the strategic EDI lead at the Trust, but is here in his capacity as UK director of the UK Black Pride organisation. So those are just some brief introductions. The title of the session is Voices and Visibility, Uncovering Hidden Histories. And of course, LGBT+ histories have been hidden. They have been sometimes eradicated from our histories. And so it's really important that we uncover those histories, that we talk about those histories, both in terms of, what they've meant, but probably more importantly, what they mean for ourselves as individually, but also as organisations moving forward in helping us to shape our actions to ensure equity, dignity and inclusive environments where we work. And I think it's essential. History is such an important kind of area that we need to kind of value and ensure that all histories are included and talked about. So that's kind of why we are here. And so I'm going to stop talking now, because there are probably more interesting things that will be said by our expert panel. So I'm going to invite Professor Helen Spandler to talk briefly about her research area. So Helen, over to you.
Hi everybody. Yeah, I'm delighted to be here for this LGBT History Month. First session I've been to for this year's History Month. Okay, so I'm a professor of mental health, really of mental health politics. So I've been interested for many years in kind of mental health politics and how certain issues get pathologized and certain experiences don't, and some of the resistance and problematization of that. And a few years ago, I managed to get some money from the Wellcome Trust to research the hidden histories of lesbian and bisexual women in the mental health system. So we were particularly interested in whether lesbians and bisexual women were also subjected to treatments like aversion therapy, which is a form of conversion therapy, which was practiced in NHS psychiatric hospitals in the 50s, 60s and 70s in this country, which basically involved electric shocks and being given drugs to be sick when you saw sexualized images of the same sex. We knew that this happened to gay men and so-called transvestite men because a colleague of ours at UCLan, Tommy Dickinson, had done some research about that. And myself and a colleague, Sarah Carr, who was also herself a survivor of some form of conversion therapy, or not aversion therapy, but a form of hypnotherapy which tried to convert her into a heterosexual woman. So myself and Sarah managed to get some money to research this issue. And we did a bottom-up archival study. So we couldn't find information in published works because women's experiences were very lost from history. And homosexual, when referred to in the literature, usually meant male. And occasionally it was prefaced with female homosexual. The term lesbian was never used. That was used by the community themselves. It is indeed, I've just seen a thing, it is absolutely LGBT History Month. Yeah, I want to say a little bit about that as well. So what we discovered was that there were a small but significant minority of lesbian and bisexual women who were given aversion therapy, and we found 10 examples of women. And I've just published, or myself and Sarah have just published, a piece in the History of Human Sciences about those 10 women's experiences of aversion therapy. And this was on young women who were probably 18, 19 years old in the early 1960s. So this was when homosexuality was still seen as a mental illness. So the relevance of this today, I think, is important given concerns about conversion therapy, which is still practiced and is still legal at this time. It's important to say, though, that it's not practiced in NHS facilities, at least not on homosexual people. However, as we know, conversion therapy is still very much practiced outside the NHS and also within the NHS on trans people, to try and convert trans people into not trans people, if you like, or cis, to keep them in the biology they were assigned at birth. So I think that history is really important. And one of the things I want to say about that is that given the sort of the debates and discussions around so-called gender identity ideology and the concerns that some women and feminists have about the trans agenda pushing out women's experiences, I think it's really important that the research that me and Sarah did was able to highlight women's experiences and lesbian and bisexual women's experiences, but we did not seek to silence trans women. And it is possible to surface women's experiences without being transphobic. And I think that's something that we need to model as much as possible, that it is possible, it's entirely possible to do both. And one does not cancel out the other. Yeah, I've just seen a comment saying I'm surprised at the number of women so low. I'm not saying that there were only 10 women treated with aversion therapy. What we said is we found 10 examples of women who were treated with aversion therapy. There may well have been more, but there probably wasn't that many more, although as it was a bottom-up archival study, so we could only find people who were somehow found in the archives in some shape or form. There's obviously people who may have experienced that, but it wouldn't have surfaced in any archive. I don't think the number's very high. I mean, there's probably only 1,000 men in total, that's the estimate, that received aversion therapy on the NHS in England during that time. And it's probably likely that women were less likely to receive that because women's sexuality was not criminalised in the same way that male homosexuality was. And a lot of men who ended up getting aversion therapy were treated via the criminal justice system. So it was, instead of being criminalised, they were offered aversion therapy instead. So women didn't go through that route. So they were probably less likely to be offered aversion therapy because they wouldn't have been criminalised directly anyway. I've probably said enough. Thank you. No. I could talk about this all night, but.
Yeah, no, that's great, Helen. That's a great kind of introduction to quite a sensitive topic there. So thank you for that. I'm going to move on to Dr. Megan Todd to talk about her research interests. Megan.
Hi, thanks very much. And again, hi everyone. And it's lovely to be part of this event. It's really exciting, and it's lovely to hear about other research that's going on, and what Helen's been talking about. So interesting and so important, and kind of touches on one of the projects I'm going to talk about today. I'm a lecturer in sociology. And for a long time, I've mainly been looking at interpersonal abuse in same-sex relationships, but that's kind of branched off a little bit in recent years. And one piece of research that I've been involved in touches on the fact that, yes, LGBT plus histories have been hidden for centuries, but they continue to be hidden. And a piece of research that I'm involved in with colleagues at Lincoln University is looking at the way in which sexualized, marginalized groups online experience abuse, particularly on social networking sites. And this involved a piece of research with through focus groups with members of the LGBT plus community, and it also that included kink practitioners as well. And not surprisingly, we found that trans people in particular experienced a whole range of forms of abuse on social networking sites. But this was an experience that people found had in common, whether they were lesbian, gay, bisexual, non-binary, and so on. And so that piece of research has led to a kind of a quite rough toolkit that we've put together for social networking sites themselves, for educators, for practitioners, to kind of offer some advice and guidance, really, in terms of how we can make our online spaces a little bit more inclusive. Because, of course, these are spaces where lots of LGBT plus people find out information about themselves, make connections, forge communities. And if they're feeling kind of that there are barriers to using these social networking sites, then that's problematic. And we found, for example, that lots of trans people wanted to document their transition through photographs, through journal articles and things like that, and very often found that people were very resistant to them posting, saying, well, why do you need to tell us about it? It's, you know, keep it to yourself kind of thing. So that's one piece of research that is relevant for thinking about the voices that are still unheard or don't have a platform. Another piece of research which has got some money from a heritage group, is looking at the way in which universities document and use their own LGBT plus histories. And this is something that universities in the United States have been interested in for a while, though haven't perhaps looked at it from an academic perspective. But it's not something that's really researched, particularly in the UK at the moment. So our initial research has been based at UCLan in Preston and also at Manchester University. And kind of reveals some interesting things about how our archives, if you like, have been managed. And it tells us a lot about fashions and trends in archiving, I think, trends in storytelling. And again, it has a lot to do with how certain voices are often left unheard, perhaps, in terms of those hidden histories. And we've unearthed some very interesting events, people that have been connected to our universities, and also reflect a kind of very interesting connection between universities and their local communities that really isn't utilised to the best way that it could be. And of course, universities have a role in transforming lives for our students, for their staff as well. And so we're kind of pushing for a kind of shift, perhaps, in the way in which universities as institutions use and kind of showcase their LGBT plus histories. But this actually might also be something that's interesting for other key institutions like the NHS, for example. So that in a nutshell is an introduction to the two main pieces of research that I'm involved in at the moment.
Just unmute myself. Thank you, Megan. That's great, really interesting. And I'm just going to sort of encourage the audience to just sort of think of any questions and either pop them in the chat or to hold on to them as to when we get into the broader discusussion. Okay, the final panel member probably needs no introduction in this trust, but Pav, I'm going to ask you to share your thoughts and experiences as a result of being director of UK Black Pride.
Thanks so much, Pradeep, and thanks to everyone for joining the meeting today. Really happy that we're having this partnership event between UCLan, Lancashire South Cumbria Foundation Trust, and UK Black Pride as well. I think it's really important that we bring together those different communities and those voices and those experiences to try and help shape what I liked what Megan was saying about how we improve spaces and society, and we empower and support our service users, but also our staff. So I want to pick up on a couple of things that that which overlap with my area of the research that we're going to talk about today. And both in Helen's piece and in Megan's piece, they talked about the experience of marginalised communities who are often overlooked, or spaces aren't actually safe for those communities to be able to speak their truth and be themselves. And that's an experience that's been shared by those people, the African, Asian, Caribbean heritage in the UK, who also happen to be LGBT, and that's the community that UK Black Pride serves each day, and we've been doing that now for about 17 years. And it's another community that's often invisibilized, marginalized, overlooked. Our experiences of racism and discrimination are hardly registered on national surveys or initiatives and programs that people are working on. And so really, UK Black Pride as an organization, we're a volunteer-led organization. We decided that now was the time for us. 17 years on, we've just won the National LGBT Award, the Charity of the Year Award. Now is the time for us to start taking hold that political agenda and shaping what kind of services and supports Black communities in Britain, Black LGBT communities in Britain are being able to access and get answers and results in relation to that. But whilst in UK Black Pride, so who are we? What do? We really exist as a space, much needed space for our communities to be able to escape, to breathe, to celebrate, you know, who we are, where we come from, and the cultures and that we represent and love. Sadly, though, I think, whilst we're in LGBT History Month and it is about celebrating, we do want to live in a world that celebrates who we are and loves us back. But that isn't the case. For a lot of people who are Black LGBT, and this came through very much in our survey, our national survey. Actually, it's incredibly heartbreaking what's happening to Black and LGBT people. You're either forced to lose your Blackness, or dissociate yourself from your ethnic heritage and your national heritage, or you're forced to disavow yourself of your LGBT identity. So it's almost as if in many spaces you can't have multiple identities. You can only have one. It's very binary and polarizing in that way. And that, of course, isn't a reality. Often we're people of faith, we're people with certain national or racial identities, and we of course have LGBT plus identities as well. And what our research shows is that there is a continuing erasure and disregard of lived experience of Black LGBT people. And two really prominent examples of that for me would be the government's 2017 National LGBT Survey, and the really awful Sewell report that the Prime Minister Johnson did last year, that came out last year, which talks about the impact of racism and discrimination. It didn't even mention Black LGBT people, because clearly for government we don't exist. And that's two national pieces of work that have completely erased the reality and existence of a community that, in our own organisation, our last event, national event, was 20,000 plus people, 20,000 plus Black LGBT people out and proud in central London at a national event. And yet we're not even acknowledged in our formal statutory sort of bodies, and that really matters. And the intersections of race, sexuality, gender identity, that's another area that really needs proper examination. So I just want to touch on a couple of things that we learned from our research, just some headliners, and then I'll wrap up there. So one thing that, some of the things that we learned from our survey, which was the largest done in the UK, it's the largest survey of Black LGBT people in the UK. We found that 47% of all our respondents said that they've been insulted, they've been pestered, they've been intimidated or harassed in person, and threatened with violence or harassment. Over 56% said that they'd been motivated by their race or ethnicity, and 47% that had been motivated by their sexuality. So these insights really offer two key, for me, insights into two big phenomena. One is the increasing anti-LGBT sentiments and discrimination across British society. And it really doesn't surprise me that the UN is now being lumped in it with Poland and Russia, because the reality I don't think it's perhaps that extreme necessarily universally, but in some parts it clearly is. Perceptions of it really are. The second thing for me is around the racism experienced by LGBT Black people within the LGBT community. And there's this anathema in our community. I think people seem to forget that people who are discriminated against are perfectly capable of discriminating others. That is a very clear reality. We've just heard from both Megan and Helen about erasure of L&B women in particular, for example, their experiences, or creative unsafe spaces. That is very much a reality within the LGBT community. I often say that it's very much a white gay male community. It's not really for others. I was just on a call before I joined this one with NHS Northwest, and a colleague from another trust was saying that she's 57 years old, she's a Black woman, LGBT, and she says she hasn't been on the scene for nearly 30 years because it didn't speak to her, it didn't represent who she was or what she's interested in. And I think that refusal to acknowledge or address the particular specific harm that's being done to Black LGBT people in this country really exacerbates the violence, and I mean psychological as well as physical and emotional discrimination that our communities experience. And this is an ongoing problem. It absolutely speaks to the lack of safety that people in our communities feel, particularly for our trans and non-binary members. They've expressed really strong feelings of lacking safety in public. The disproportionate debate around bathrooms, gyms and sports groups and so forth almost dehumanizes the lives and experiences of Black LGBT people. And if we look at the stratas of hierarchies, we talk about white privilege. It's not to say that white people don't experience inequality. We're just saying that your ethnicity isn't one of the problems that you will experience in this country. Or if you're white, it's less likely for you to be that being a barrier for you. Whereas if you're not white, it is a barrier. And then if you're adding to that multiple layers of I don't know, if you're trans, for example, you're non-binary, if you're lesbian, if you're a person of faith and so forth, it just adds layers and layers and layers of inequalities to our people's experience. And that's a huge impact on people's confidence and their ability to be able to engage in spaces both in public or in private, but also in their workplace context. So that's some of the work that we've done. There's lots of details that I could unpack, but I'll stop there. Thanks, Pradeep.
Great, and it sounds like we should have had this all afternoon to discuss the various things that have come up. They're all really important and all really kind of critical in terms of considering how we move forward with some of those things. I did have a question for the panel, but I'm just going to sort of pause for a moment to see if there are kind of any questions from people who have joined us today. So I'm just going to sort of see if there are any questions or comments or observations. Joe, I think you've got your hand up there.
It was a question for Helen. Helen, you spoke about organisations that are offering conversion therapy that are outside the NHS. What kind of organisations are they? Are they just predominantly religious organisations, or is this something outside the religious area that's offering that?
Hiya, yeah. Well, my research primarily focused on the mental health system, so I don't know too much about that. But what I can say is that yes, I think that most of organisations are religious organisations, but also there are mental health services outside the NHS, and therapists can pretty much offer what they want. And if someone is sent by their family member or even by themselves because they feel ashamed about their sexuality or gender, then practitioners outside the NHS could decide to offer some form of conversion therapy. So I guess there would be the two main organisations that would, or types of services that would offer conversion therapy.
If I can jump in there, just to agree, I wrote a very small piece for the conversation a while back on conversion therapy, and it wasn't based on years of research or anything like that, but certainly there are lots of private practitioners who are still offering conversion therapies, aversion therapy in the UK. So it's quite easy to find if you wanted to, unfortunately.
I don't know if there's any examples of aversion therapy as such. Are there still examples of that? I'd be surprised if that was offered, because
I think actually the examples I find of that there are in the States still.
In the States, still,
yeah.
Okay, not in the UK though. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that. Any other questions or comments at this point?
Can I just add just a point to that, Pradeep, because on the conversion therapy stuff in particular, I mean, the government is mooting, and EHRC has also, it seems to be entertaining, the Equality Human Rights Commission seems to be entertaining this idea of excluding faith organisations, possibly, and certainly excluding trans organisations. That's been mooted as and I, just from an LGBT perspective and an LGBT organisation perspective, I think that is really worrying that we're even entertaining that idea, or those ideas, that they're being mooted and discussed as if they're credible. I know, I mean, I come from the Muslim faith community, enormous harm being done to people in my faith community background who are of LGBT heritage status, identity, and the pressure that's been put on them both in this country or them being taken out of this country and taken elsewhere. We talk about forced marriage and so forth, and some of the same narratives that feed those experiences also feeds conversion therapy by families, and we need to recognize that, and it is a serious risk that people are exposed to. And yeah, loopholes don't help those people. They're often the least likely to access services.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, Pab. Thank you for sharing that. Any other questions at the moment? Okay, I've got a question then for the panel, and it's, we talk about LGBT histories being hidden, being invisible, not being talked about, and I'm just wondering, sort of in the context of our own organisations that we work for or know about, what the impact of that is in terms of being able to advance equity. and inclusion for LGBT plus communities and individuals. Pav.
Look, I mean, UK Black Pride really was a response to Black and Asian communities not being given platforms and spaces and not being included and involved in, what we needed. The turning point really was for us in 2005 when we were in Pride in London, and that year I think the theme of Pride in London's parade floats was stage or show. Stage shows or something like that, and they specifically asked us. We were the BME coalition at the time, Black Coalition of LGBT organisations, and they asked us to come and do Lion King. And John, I'll let you process that for a moment. Grass skirts, African savannah, animals in the jungle, etc., etc. And we were like, hell no. You're not even giving us a choice as to what we come as or what our flow should be. You're inviting us to consider being Lion King, and we're like, no, screw you. We're not going to do that. And that was really the turning point for us. That realizing that this white organisation really doesn't get us, doesn't really understand or respect our history and our culture and how we want to be represented. And so that was the turning point for us to, we were never really given a visibility of space. And so we decided, okay, we need to do this for ourselves. And so we quit Pride in London. We didn't get involved for a good 10 or so years. And we went about setting up our own space, which was a safe space for African Asian heritage LGBT people. Actually, it was started by 15 lesbians. It was a Black lesbian women-led organisation. It was the first and only Black-led organisation in the LGBT movement, and that was really powerful for us. So we created our own narratives, and the difference in 17 years is really quite breathtaking, in terms of how we're taking this seriously. We can now talk about mental health. We talk about access to fertility for Black women in the movement. We talk about policing and immigration and asylum issues, stuff that we were always told was peripheral, marginal stuff, that it was not relevant. And yet here we were in the recent Afghan evacuation, for example, where it was our movement was absolutely central. Our relationships with the Commonwealth and parts of the world outside of Britain was absolutely critical in getting access and aid to communities. Phil Opokojima, she's the chief exec of UK Black Pride. We're doing a lot of work in terms of Commonwealth countries. We helped fight the case in India to repeal the sodomy laws there, the anti-homosexuality laws there. We've done the same in Trinidad. So that's the power that we have when we create our own narratives and we have our own visibility, we can help set and shape the political as well as the social agenda, and that's the power of visibility and why our stories need to be seen and heard.
Yeah, no, that's a great narrative, and and being visible is and being conscious of that visibility, I think, is always the kind of first step or the early steps in trying to sort of rectify or transform organisational approaches to things. Very often I come across, I didn't know that was an issue. I didn't know that was a thing. And if people don't know it's a thing, then how can you even kind of move on from that? Helen, Megan, I'm just wondering whether you have any sort of thoughts on visibility and impact on organisations.
Well, I mean, we certainly know from research by groups like Stonewall and even sort of looking at statistics within our own university that there are a significant proportion of staff and students who still don't want to declare their sexuality. Now, obviously, we can't assume that those that don't want to declare their sexuality are LGBT plus staff and students, but we can make an intelligent guess that a fair few of them probably are. We also know from similar pieces of research that certainly staff working in universities across the UK frequently report instances of homophobia at worst, or not feeling welcome perhaps in lots of spaces across universities. So I think if we can maximise visibility, perhaps by through archives and other things, that certainly creates a much more inclusive space, doesn't it? We know, for example, at UCLan recently we had a drive, didn't we, to encourage staff to use their pronouns. And that's had really positive feedback. And Pradeep, you'll be able to talk about that in more detail. But that's just one example of a small thing that actually makes a huge difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the pronouns campaign was relatively successful. We haven't fully evaluated that yet, but certainly, you know, we're seeing lots more people, staff members, using pronouns on their email signatures, for example. But I think more importantly, it began to sort of generate a discussion, didn't it? It was like, well, why do we have to do that? What's, you know, why are people suddenly doing this? And so you can then get into a conversation about why it's important and what it means and so on and so forth. And I've always been a sort of great believer in conversation as a sort of powerful way in which you can sort of begin to effect change. Because if you're not having those conversations, then nothing's happening. So, you know, conversations, sometimes difficult conversations, difficult questions, I think are important, and I think organisations also need to kind of wake up to having those conversations, because that does lead to greater consciousness, greater visibility, and hopefully some talk about what we can do about some of the inequities that we've got there. I'll also just pick up on the point, Megan, about staff disclosing sexual orientation on sort of you know, the staff records and so on. And what's interesting is that we do see quite a big difference between the numbers of staff who disclose and the number of students who are willing to disclose that information. And it's quite pleasing in a way to see that our students are much more willing to give us that information than our staff are. Which might tell us something about, you know, younger people and their comfortableness with disclosing this. I think that may be positive, but equally there are some challenges for us as, you know, in our staff communities in reassuring staff that disclosing won't mean discrimination. It doesn't mean kind of outing. It doesn't mean you know, that people get treated in a different way. And so there's a piece of work, and I don't know if that's similar in the trust, or indeed whether you collect that information for patients. I see in the chat there a couple of questions coming in. One from Megan. What does Megan and the panel see as a future for LGBTQ plus safety online?
I tend to be a bit of an eternal pessimist. I think obviously we're talking about intersectionality quite a bit, and obviously it's not just LGBT plus people who aren't welcome online. We can talk about ethnicity, women, a whole range of groups experience and violence and abuse online and are marginalised. But I you know, partly, as we said, it's about having conversations, it's about awareness, it's about education, and it you know, there are some really easy things that could resolve some of the problems. Social networking sites themselves, conveners taking a little bit more responsibility for not accepting or tolerating abuse and calling it out, you know, and all of us to call it out when we see it, I think. It's hard, isn't it, in a sort of post-Brexit world where all sorts of hate and intolerance seems to be on the rise. I don't feel terribly optimistic about the future, but of course recent events, the last couple of years, have shown us how important the online world is for all of us. And that division between online and offline is a false division, isn't it? I don't know. I looked at the panel for kind of slightly more optimistic views of the future, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's in, you know, the whole online world is problematic, isn't it? And I think until you get proper regulation of that environment, it's going to be difficult to to stop people using it for their own personal ways of abusing others, and so on. So I think it is difficult, and I think the government needs to kind of get hold of, or well, globally, someone needs to get hold of that and get proper regulation in place in terms of how it's monitored.
I think, can I say something about this?
Yeah, go on, Helen.
It's kind of related to both points about our institutions and about online abuse and stuff. And I was kind of thinking about the whole, I mean, I'm very into sort of bottom-up initiatives rather than top-down initiatives. But on the other hand, it's really important when an institution backs those bottom-up initiatives. So like, for example, the pronoun campaign. But at the same time, you see so much online unpleasantness from people within our own academic community as well. For example, academic colleague, not within our institution, but in another institution, tweeted online something about, I know when someone's not worth talking to when they have their pronouns in their profile, that they're somehow some kind of idiot because they've been duped into this gender identity ideology and they have their pronouns on, and that it's some sort of virtue signaling rather than it's a way to be inclusive. And it might, there's many people out there who just don't understand how important these things are. And I think that this has also come out within the freedom of speech issue. Which is also hugely problematic within universities, and some unions have been passing sort of freedom of speech message. We already have a very powerful academic freedom of speech, but somehow it's now okay to abuse trans people as freedom of speech. And that's hugely problematic when freedom of speech is used to weaponize transphobia, which is specifically, it's transphobia that's being weaponized, not particularly homophobia, but transphobia specifically. And that's hugely problematic within our universities, not within UCLan specifically, but across universities.
Yeah, and that whole freedom of speech thing, I think, is going to be the next big battleground in terms of being able to talk about things or not to talk about things, or being given a green light to talk about things that or espouse views that many would find disagreeable, and that's not taken away from freedom of speech, because I'm sure most of us are ardent supporters of freedom of speech, but it's the way in which, as you say, it's being weaponized, in the way it's being kind of couched, and certain side of ideologies being promoted through that we need to be worried about.
But if I can give another example,
so
slightly broader than, I don't know if you may have picked up on this. It was the Harvard example just a couple of days ago. There was an academic accused of sexual harassment of women students, and there's a whole list of academics who've come out in support of this individual, saying, "Oh, we can't believe it," etc., etc., and in effect denouncing the women who've raised their voice against sexual harassment. And I guess it's just to say that, in like the top university in the world, that there's organizations consistently fall down in providing structural support and safe space to people to speak their truth or to speak out when things are harassment of one description, whether it's against women or whether it's against LGBT people or people, minoritized faith communities and so forth. That is a very real experience, even in some of the most progressive, supposedly liberal spaces, and that happens all the time. And I echo the points that have just been made around this cancellation versus protection culture, where there's ideas and debates, free speech and not. Free speech has always should be qualified. Of course, you have the freedom of speech to shout fire, fire. But if you want to, if you're so inclined, but that doesn't count. It's not without a consequence. You can shout fire, fire. But if you're only going to disrupt the lives and experience of other people who are also perhaps caught up in your shouting fire and fire, there are unintended consequences of your freedom of speech on those people. So it does qualify your freedom of speech. And I think the debate in trans in particular for me has been a really toxic one in this country, because my dad's from Islamic Republic of Pakistan, which has surprisingly quite progressive views. You've got trans people in the constitution, that you're allowed to have a third gender in your passports. They've got in the police service, you've got, and this is the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, for God's sake, if the Islamic Republic can do this, I don't know why Britain can't do it too, and why we can't have a balanced, reasonable approach. And somehow this demonization of certainly the trans community, and that's where the big focus has been over the last recent years, it creates a really hostile environment. And that hostile environment doesn't just end with trans people. Those of us who are from the LGBT community who've been around long enough know that once they're done with the trans, they will come for the lesbians, they will come for the bis, and then the gays. It just is what it is. And those who've been through the system understand the politics, if you like, behind, but that's not always easy to see for those who are perhaps only seeing it in a binary sort of superficial level.
Yeah, Helen, are you putting your hand up there?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I think that's really important, and that's when we need to know our own history. This is when history is really important, because when we know our own history, we know that LGBT people's lives are tied up with trans people's lives. Our history is intertwined and unentangled. We cannot, we can't have sexual liberation without gender liberation. We can't have gender liberation without sexual liberation. They go hand in hand, and oppression goes hand in hand. Without sexism, we wouldn't have homophobia. They are absolutely intrinsically interrelated. And people who try and, for example, get rid of the T from LGBT aren't understanding our history. And that's why LGBT History Month is so important, to be able to reclaim our history and demonstrate how intertwined the struggle is and always will be.
That's a brilliant point, Helen, and it almost sounds like the startings of another sort of session around how those histories are intertwined. I think that's a really important point that is often missed or misunderstood. So let's make a note of that. See whether we can get something on that point. Just coming to the chat. Becky, you kind of want to hear a bit more of our pronoun work here at UCLan. Happy to talk to you offline about that. But I think one of the key points and why it was successful was the leadership buy-in to that. So we actually had our Deputy Vice Chancellor at the time, who kind of spearheaded that campaign. So it wasn't me as Director of EDI or Sully as EDI officer, it came from the top. And, that has much more impact than, much as we all like to say we've got impact than if I did it, for example. And it had a much more, immediate and impactful thing. But yeah, happy to talk to you, Becky, offline about that. Sully, you got a question there about the importance of staff coming out to their employers. Should they? Is that, is it any of the business of the employer? Should they be interested?
Yes, it's always said, why shall I share my sexual, orientation with my employer? And then obviously we want to increase the number of declarations from his staff and his students. We have a higher declaration from his students. I don't know about NHS, it sounds like it's similar as well. There is a struggle. Why people should come out for the employers?
Yeah, any comments or thoughts on that?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? It's a real tension between wanting to know the information and the statistics, and also the importance of coming out to our communities, but also the fear, because our struggle is still continuing and it's not won. It is a lot easier now to be lesbian or gay, but it's still hard to be bisexual, and it's even harder to be trans. So it's quite hard, I think, to expect our community to come out when we don't know whether those gains will continue or whether they'll be rolled back. So I think it's an issue of trust and faith in our institutions, and we don't always have that, really.
Yeah.
That's such an important point. I mean, the fragility of the state we're in. We only have to look to certain countries in Eastern Europe to understand why so many people might be unsure about, well, who's going to be looking at this data, what's going to be done with it. But on the other hand, it's also really important to have that information, because of course, you know, a lot of people might resist, whether they are lesbian, gay, bisexual, straight, you know, might say, well, it's a private matter. And I think that's the other issue, isn't it? Of course, sexuality, like anything else, isn't actually a private matter. It's very much a public matter. It's a legal matter. It's something that the attitudes to it, ideas about it, are constructed in the public sphere. And I think very often that's almost seen as the last bastion of you know, if nothing else, at least our sexuality is essential. It's an essence, we're born with it, or whatever. And I'm not going to get into that debate particularly, but I think it's not, you know, it's exactly the same as any other aspect of identity in that sense. It's not private in all sorts of ways. And until people are comfortable disclosing to their employers, until employers realise actually the numbers, you know, that they are responsible for, have a duty for, who are members of different communities, then we're in a problematic society, I think, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
Pradeep, if I just add to that, I think there's a really uneven distribution of where people come out. You know, in the survey that we did, the research that we did at UK Black Pride, we found that 84% of our respondents, and as well as the largest survey in Britain, I hasten to add, of Black LGBT people, nearly 1,500 people interviewed. 84% of our respondents aren't out to anyone in their family or in their community. 84%, so nearly 9 in 10 people are not out. That is not the same experience for white LGBT people in Britain. I'm not saying that, but so there are inequalities within inequalities, and the layers of that, and we need to recognise some of those factors. And that number improved when it came to gender identity, I suppose, because people live their true authentic selves. So that was 59% for people in terms of living with, you know, different gender identity one they were born with. So, you know, there are inequalities even within that, and again, it comes back to the issue of trust and safety. You know, if you can't be honest with yourselves or your immediate, why should you let your employer know, and what will happen with that, and what the consequences of that?
Yeah, and I think sort of bound up in all of that, I think, is also the sort of question of intersectionality and kind of having a, you know, organisations really understanding, you know, that we're not all have single identities, and understanding some of those multiple layers and multiple complexities will lead us to some you know, deeper and more richer kind of narratives, discussions, and solutions to some of the issues. So, you know, the one size fits all approach and so on is just not going to be viable. So I think that understanding and acceptance of intersectionality, I think, is really, really critical moving forward. Helen, I can see you desperately trying to sort of get in there. It's fantastic.
Sorry, yeah, just
probably throwing things at me if we were in the same room, saying, "Shut up, Pradeep, I need to make this point." Sorry.
That might happen at some point, Pradeep. I hope so. Yeah, I just wanted to say, I don't think anyone's mentioned it yet, but the issue of social class is so important in regarding intersectionality. And just to mention it, in our research, for example, what was really interesting was that, you know, working class men, poor men, and to some extent women would end up in the criminal justice system, LGBT people. And it was often the more educated middle class people that ended up getting aversion therapy or conversion therapy. Not that it's a better option necessarily, but it just goes to show that oppression works through different channels. And I think it's a lot harder if you're talking about coming out to employers. You know, it's a lot harder if you're a working class person in a working class job, in a traditional working class employment, to come out. It's a lot harder to be, as it was in the early days of gay liberation, to come out in the working class community. It's a lot harder to come out as trans in working class communities sometimes, you know. So I think that is I think class is a really important issue that often gets hidden within these discussions too. Yeah,
and that's another hidden sort of voice or a hidden history there that sometimes gets missed out. I'm just conscious of time. We did say we'd wrap up by 2. And there's just one sort of question that lots of comments and so on coming in through the chat now, which is fantastic. But just final question, I think, just following on from that point, panel members, is from Nicola Kitchen. Do you think that if people had the confidence to declare their sexuality in the workplace, it would encourage employers to improve duty of care and educate others?
Can I say just quickly something about that? I think possibly, but then again, your employers might say, well, you know, you can come out now. What's the problem? You don't need any additional support because it's a lot easier to be LGBT now. So it might work the other way. We don't know. Just to put in that spanner.
Yeah, but I think I'd probably say that sometimes employers might be surprised at the numbers if everybody did declare, and actually it's not that much of a minority issue actually, because there are quite small but significant numbers of staff or students. According to our student data, around about 9% of students identify as LGBT plus on a sort of response rate of 88%. I think it's 88%. Who give us that information. So, out of 30,000 students that we have, that's work out the math. That's a significant community. Any other, Megan or Pav, on that? Should people declare? Would
declare or not? Look, I was going to finish on a positive note.
If people did declare, would it encourage?
I was going to say, remind us that one of the respondents to our survey, when we asked them what brings them joy, because being LGBT, it can be a joyful, happy thing too. It's not always sad, miserable, and depressive. Well, my life isn't anyway. But somebody said, being celebrated for who I am and being with my chosen family, who I know will support and uplift me, being with others and just breathing, existing, and thriving, being seen and being held. That's what brings them joy. And I just want to say that some of what this History Month is about is also about bringing that to light too, that what do we need and how do we fix things. And it's not big fixes that we need, it's small fixes that we need that make the most impact, I think, sometimes in our lives and our communities. And each of us has the capacity to do that, to our colleague, to our patient, to our family members and our friends, and each of us, if we focus on that, that helps build that alliance and solidarity that we need in the wider movement.
Great, fantastic. And I think on that sort of note, I think we are going to have to conclude the event this afternoon. It's been a really, really fantastic discussion. We probably could have gone on all afternoon. Thank you to colleagues in the chat and who've been kind of putting in points. You can read those after the event. You can continue to probably have the discussion online after the event as well. Let's say thank you to colleagues on the panel for sharing their thoughts and research interests on this, to Helen and Megan and Pav. You've really given us some really useful insights, but really kind of highlighted that point about how important it is to unhide, if that even is a word, the hidden histories of the LGBT plus communities and individuals. It's so important that those stories are told, that we kind of don't hide things away, because as I sort of truly believe that once you kind of raise those consciousness, that's always the first step in taking action as we move forward. So thank you for sharing that, and I wish everyone a happy afternoon. Thank you. Oh, Joe, I think you were going to sort of just give a slight plug to some other events that you've got going on in LGBT plus History Month, if you want to.
That's right, yeah.
That.
Thank you, and just to say thank you to our panel. It's been a fantastic session. Yes, there's just a couple of events. I put them in the chat, but it didn't copy and paste very well. But one that perhaps people will be really interested in, it's a session with Nancy Kelly, Chief Executive of Stonewall, and it's an opportunity to listen and engage with Chief Executive of Stonewall, the largest LGBTQ charity. And if you are interested in that session, I did put it in the chat, but you might not be able to see it clearly, so I'll just put a link to our email address. You can just email us and we'll send you the link for that session. We've also got our Pen and Ink book club, and we're reading Detransition Baby by Tori Peters, and that's on the 24th of February at 7 o'clock at night. Everyone is welcome to join that session. I forgot to mention the date for Nancy Keller, so that's the 22nd of February at 1 o'clock. And then we've also got a session next week with Lancs LGBT. We're looking at shaping the future of LGBT training needs for the local NHS system. That's on the 15th of February at 1 o'clock. And finally, we have a celebratory picnic launch to launch the NHS Progress Badge, which we're moving on to in our trust. And that's on the 28th of February, 1 till 2. But I'll put our email address in the chat, and if anyone wanted any more information, then please just get in touch. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. See you all soon.
Thanks, Pradeep. Thanks, everybody, for coming. See you soon.